Hello, everyone. This is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Thank you for attending this March CSIA webinar. Today we are continuing our webinar series that was designed in conjunction with Nick Setchell, and Nick is our presenter today. Nick opened the series in August, and it concludes next month on April 9th. As a finale to the webinar series, all presenters of the webinars will have presentation sessions at our 2014 conference, which is April 23rd to the 26th, so be sure to attend. In today's webinar, Nick will provide information on J-curve management, a critical element of ensuring that innovative strategic investments are held accountable. Be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box. Nick enjoys interaction, so don't be shy. The webinar will be archived for later viewing, and the slides will be available also. The host and sponsor of our monthly webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox helps system integrators lower their risk on projects that involve software by providing them a unique mix of off-the-shelf software products and a rapid response technical support that minimizes the need for custom code and lowers field startup time risk. Now let me introduce Nick Setchell. Nick is CEO of Practice Strategies, a business improvement consulting firm that defined and developed real-time CEO and fiscal focus. Nick has analyzed in excess of 1,000 businesses and worked with hundreds of CEOs and executives around the world to help them better understand their business performance and make better business decisions, and that includes some CSIA members. Nick is also a top-rated international Vistage speaker and hails from Australia. So, without further delay, here's Nick.
Thank you, Bob, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all well. Calling into this webinar from the middle of the night in Australia, so all good over here and looking forward to spending the next hour or so with you. As Bob mentioned, this session is the 7th webinar of a series of 8 that we kicked off back in August. And the webinar series was all about understanding and proactively leading your business in a landscape that's changing rapidly. Nothing has occurred since August last year to make Bob or I feel that the landscape is changing any less rapidly. In fact, each month we progress through a very, very exciting time in the economic recovery of not just the United States of America, but recovery around the world. We see a series of exciting opportunities present. There are, of course, as there always is on the landscape, risks as well. But when we designed this webinar series, we wanted to equip you with a number of different views on how you could manage your business in this environment. We started off with a holistic review of managing business. Then we got quite specific on organizational culture with Ken Edmondson. 24 months rolling was the second webinar that I gave late last year. We then went into developing a professional project management team for systems integration. Jeff Miller presented that session. More from Ken Edmondson in terms of people and the critical issues of hiring and leading and coaching and evaluating and how we join all of that up. Gina then touched in on performance management program for technical professionals last month, and today it's my pleasure to present a little bit more information on J-curve management. We will finalize the webinar series just before the annual conference in San Diego, Integrated Business Systems, with Kathy and John presenting that. So this has been a long journey leading into the conference. I'm looking forward to catching up with as many of you as possible at the conference. And it's been a long journey, and I hope that you've all enjoyed participating in this series. As you can see from the slide that I have on the screen at the moment, when we opened up the series back in August, we talked about the holistic responsibility of leaders of business, and we talked about different quadrants that you need to be thinking about within the business. The foundation quadrant, defining your purpose, value and culture. the market quadrant, defining how you interact with not just your market strategies, but also your tactical sales approach. We talked about the importance of defining the correct price in a rapidly changing landscape. In the people quadrant, Ken shared a lot of his expertise with you, and obviously in the operations quadrant, we've had a couple of webinars in there, including number 8 that's coming up. Core management principles we touched on in the first session, and then we were quite specific in terms of real-time planning in the third session, and today we're talking about strategic investment, or J-curves as we refer to them. Every business that I've ever worked with around the world, and that number's over 1,000 now, has J-curve investments or strategic investments in their business at any point of time. I can say that about all of the businesses attending today, even though some of you I won't have met, for the simple reason that if you're in business, there will be things that you're spending money on today that will not benefit your business till the future, and that of course is the key definition of a J-curve. So thinking about the term J-curve, please don't think that I invented this term. In fact, if you go on to that fabulous resource, Wikipedia, you'll find this incredibly valuable definition. A J-curve is something that initially falls and then rises to a higher point. Well, I'm left with the absolute view that what would we do without Wikipedia? That's such an incredibly valuable addition to this topic. But let's push this a little bit further, because J-curves have been used in many different environments. In fact, in 2006, the Economist Book of the Year author Ian Bremmer used the concept of J-curves to define and understand political rise and fall of nations. So clearly that's using this concept on a very, very macro whole of nation basis. For those of you, if you've had any interest in Australian politics, which may or may not be many of you, may recall an individual called Paul Keating. He was at the time our Treasurer in the 80s and later became our Prime Minister. Paul Keating endeared himself to the Australian business community when he described our economy to the rest of the world as a banana republic. This was back in the early 80s, before Australia then proceeded to have 23 years of positive economic growth, the longest stretch of economic growth of any country in the world. But Paul Keating back in the early 80s was saying what probably needed to be said, which was we had to address some fundamental productivity issues if we wanted our economy to go forward. So Paul Keating was using the concept of the J-curve to describe the entire economy here in Australia. So the term J-curves has been around for some time. What do we refer to J-curves within our mechanisms? Well, we see them very much as examples where you make a strategic decision to spend money today on something that will not benefit you till later on. So let's talk a little bit about some examples of J-curves, and I think what you will pick up very quickly is that all of you have some of these examples of investment in your business. So whenever you're launching a new product line, those of you who do this frequently, and I know many members of CSIA do, you know that there's a significant research and development cost that needs to be incurred before you can even hope to get any return back for that investment. Each time you change the way that you access your market strategy, and I know that CSIA has been doing a lot of work with its membership in terms of not just defining market strategy, but working with Sandler in terms of tactical sales approaches. But each time you change the way you interact with your market, for example, one of the more popular mechanisms in recent years has been to establish an electronic presence for a website or some sort of internet portal, which can be extremely effective. But believe me, it costs a lot of money to get established, and you may not get direct benefit from that until down the track. Each time you purchase a new piece of equipment, you do that for one reason and one reason alone, and that's to increase your capacity and your ability to deliver services going forward. But of course, you've got to employ all the appropriate capital to purchase the equipment today, and we'll use that additional capacity in coming years. The most common J-curve that we see in most businesses, and particularly, can I say, in service businesses, is hiring people. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the webinar this morning, but you all well know that you have to pay these people a salary from day one, and yet they may not be productive until some time after they've joined you. Many of you will have had the experience where you've brought on staff and started to train them, and that the recruitment just hasn't worked out, and they've left your business well before you've got a return on your training investment. So staff are, for many businesses, and particularly service companies, the most common J-curve that you will have in your business. And many of my clients in this space, almost their entire J-curve register, which is a list of the key J-curves in their business, is made up of people. Other examples of J-curves. When you're expanding your geographical footprint or your footprint within a location of having new business premises or bigger business premises, or even opening satellite offices, so it may be more floor space where you are, or it may be opening different outlets in different geographical places around the country. That is, of course, going to require significant upfront investment for the benefit of future expansion. Now, here's a highly emotive one that's come up here, the concept of core manufacturing moving overseas. In your country, the United States of America, and mine in Australia, and in fact in many developed countries through Europe as well, the UK is another example, we have seen traditionally over the past number of years high-cost labour manufacturing shifting to locations such as China and Mexico, where labour costs are significantly less. Now, there are significant benefits that can be accrued from lower labour costs in manufacturing, but of course the cost associated with those benefits is losing some of the local control that you had over local manufacturing, and of course dealing with the significantly different cultural issues that you will find in other countries. I found it extremely interesting in recent trips around the world that there's now significant evidence of what's now being referred to as onshoring, with manufacturing of some products coming back to the United States and coming back to Europe from China. Interesting to observe that those that have researched this area are now identifying that if the labour cost is less than 25% of your manufacturing costs, there's merit in doing it closer to home. In other words, the savings of doing it in a low-cost labour market are not worth the difference in cost of challenges of dealing with someone so far away. So that is extremely good news for countries like the United States and Australia and the UK, where we should see a net increase now in our manufacturing numbers after massive, massive drains of manufacturing out of our countries. Another key example of J-curves, and this is on a more strategic higher level, is the concept of acquiring competitors. This one's a particular challenge because well after you bed down the numerical issues of acquiring a competitor and merging two organisations together, you still have significant challenges in terms of blending the two cultures. And in my experience, without any shadow of doubt, the key to a successful merger or acquisition is establishing a strong positive culture, a culture that has underpinned the success of the initial business. So all of these things here are examples of J-curves. It's not an exclusive list, but exhaustive list, but it is indeed a list that many of you will relate to items on this list that are operating within your business. Having had the opportunity to now track literally thousands and thousands of these J-curve investments through business, one thing is becoming extremely clear to me as a business coach, as a management consultant, and that is that the identification, prioritization, and then management of these particular J-curves is one of the most important determinants of entrepreneurial success. You can either, if you do this well, get tremendous benefit and reward for your innovative flair, or you can burn and waste a lot of money, depending on whether you do this well or not. It is the key determinant of entrepreneurial success. And yet, despite that factor, it interests me to observe that so many businesses that I initially talked to do not have a formal mechanism for tracking J-curves through their business. And what I want to talk about today, and we will be expanding in this in the conference in a more practical breakout fashion. What I want to talk about today, though, is a J-curve framework, relatively easy for you to implement, that will help you keep tabs and control these strategic investments so you get rewarded as opposed to money just dropping through the cracks. In this framework, we're going to talk about the 3 phases to a J-curve, and particularly how your behavior needs to differ depending on which of these 3 phases you're in. We're then going to talk about the way that we measure J-curves and trying to keep this relatively simple in the first instance so that you can get momentum with this process, but understanding the key elements of measuring J-curves. The next component of this framework is the 5 rules of managing J-curves. And then we're going to talk about some other issues and broader impacts of J-curve management as they will impact your business. So let's talk about the 3 phases of the J-curve first. And on the vertical axis, we have cash flow, money that this project is taking out of our business, money that this project is bringing into our business. And on the horizontal axis, we have time. Now, you've heard me talk about in the past, and the very title of this webinar series is a rapidly changing landscape. So imagine that you're on this landscape at some stage, you're looking out to the horizon, and you come up with this fantastic idea, this innovative idea. And you know that if you do this, if you implement this and execute this idea effectively, that you will benefit and your business will be stronger in the future than it is today. You also know that it's highly likely that you will have to take 1 step back to take 2 steps forward. And there lies the J shape and therefore the definition of the J curve. Now, this shape instantly then defines itself into 3 distinct phases. And those phases are important to understand because our behavior will need to differ depending on which of the 3 phases that we're in. So let's talk about phase 1, the phase that we refer to as the investment phase. Now, phase 1 has a couple of quite distinct characteristics. The first is the characteristic that, of course, we all understand very well, which is because of its size and its pain, which is the characteristic of having to pull out the checkbook and write a significant check today to fund this initial investment, whatever it happens to be. Everybody understands that because most of the attention is focused on that rather painful first check that you have to write to get into this particular area. But be careful of the second characteristic, a hidden characteristic that's every bit as dangerous, and that is what I call cash flow bleeding. Well after you've written out your initial significant check, cash is still bleeding out through the cracks at a far faster rate than this particular project is delivering cash back to you. So you're in fact still going backwards. You're still in a negative cash position, and in fact, the total of that negative cash position is getting bigger. Now, let's hope that at some stage in the not too distant future, that over a period of time, let's say we're measuring this month on month, over a single month, that the amount of cash that's then dripping out through the cracks is exceeded by the amount of cash that this project starts to bring into the business. So over the life of the business, your project is still cash flow negative, but over a single month, it's now turned the corner and it's started to give you something back. For that particular project, you have now entered phase 2, which is what we call the catch-up phase. The project is still, whole of life project is still cash flow negative, but it's now starting to pay you back some of the money that it took out in phase 1. Now, as it continues to do that and pays back all of the money in phase one, as you hit cash flow positive for the entire life, that is what I refer to as the blue sky phase. This is the very reason why people invest in J-curves, because they want to be stronger tomorrow than they were yesterday. Now, businesses typically measure some of the elements of J-curve at the moment. And in fact, the most common measurement that we see is the difference between the beginning of phase one and the end of phase two, which is often referred to as the payback. And you will all be familiar with the concept of the payback period. How long will it take for me to get my money back? Now, that is a valid calculation. There's absolutely no problem with that calculation. However, it is somewhat one-dimensional in my opinion. And when we talk about the tracking J-curves, we don't want to just think about these J-curves in terms of a time axis, but in fact in a more two-dimensional axis, looking at not just how long is it going to take us to get our money back, but more importantly, what will be the full extent of the cash that's going to suck out of our business at the worst phase or worst stage in this J-curve investment. So we look at this from a two-dimensional perspective, and we refer to this environment between the beginning of phase one and the end of phase two as the risk zone. You will hear me talk about the risk zone as I go on through this webinar. There are a lot of things that can occur to J-curve investments while you're still in the risk zone that can result in those investments stalling. And if they stall in the middle of the risk zone, unfortunately you have only succeeded in doing two things: to waste time and to waste money. So clearly we need to be very conscious of how we keep these things moving, how we track and monitor and manage them through the risk zone so that we get through that area up into the blue sky and get rewarded for our innovative flair. So let's talk a little bit about the rules of managing J-curves. And the first rule I want to talk about is, seems incredibly simple, but it's incredibly important. Endeavor to limit the depth and the breadth of your valley. Now, that's very easy to say. It's extremely hard to do. One of the simple realities of J-curves is that they will inevitably have deeper, wider valleys than you initially think. Now, I can imagine, as I say that point, a number of you are nodding your head. Many, many, many of you will have gone through a situation where you're excited about a strategic investment. You've had the upside presented to you very well by the person who's coming to you with the idea. You've got excited in the upside. You've invested in that particular idea, and it's taken a lot longer for the benefits to accrue. Quite possibly the benefits have accrued, but it's taken a lot longer for those benefits to realize. And in fact, you had to invest more money to get to the point where you were getting benefit. So the valley became deeper and wider. Good rule of thumb, and you may well wonder how I know this. I know this because we've tracked thousands of J-curves through business. Good rule of thumb is that J-curve valleys will typically be twice the depth and twice the width of your initial assessment. Now, part of the reason for that, and we bring that upon ourselves, is that when we ask our key personnel in our business to come to us with good ideas, we're sending a message to them that if they want us to pick their idea, they're going to need to sell the upside really strongly. And the natural extension of that is that they will downplay the downside. Now, what you need to do as a leader of your business is to encourage an honest discussion about both of the sides. The upside, because that's what's going to excite you to invest in this project, but also to understand the downside. Those of you who attended the first webinar in this series will have heard me say that the job description of the leader really falls into two categories: create value and mitigate risk. Understanding the upside of the J-curve is all about the value that it can create, but understanding the variables that could turn this valley into a deeper, wider valley is all about the risk mitigation element of your role as well. Many entrepreneurial CEOs are very focused on creating value. Paradoxically, they're nowhere near as focused on mitigating risk, and that can create significant danger to them. To put this in a practical sense, on a personal level, many of you will have at some stage in your life done renovations on your house. It's a very exciting thing to go through. It can also be very stressful, and it can also have a number of ramifications. But almost everybody that I've ever spoken to who's done renovations on their house has reported that it took longer than they originally thought and it cost more. And that's what J-curves do. Now, let's have a look at rule number 2 of J-curves. This is the most challenging rule associated with running any business. Absolutely no doubt in my mind. Try not to become emotionally connected to the J-curve. Now, that is easier said than done. A lot of people say to me, well, Nick, I can't be a robot when I'm running my business. I need to have passion and enthusiasm for what I do. And I agree with that. That's absolutely right. But the most successful CEOs and leaders of business that I've met around the world have got all of that passion wrapped up in that velvet glove around an iron fist of trying to strip away some of the distracting emotion when they're making good decisions. Now, one of the things that can happen to a J-curve, and you've got to be extremely careful of it, is the concept of people attaching their political and emotional future to a pet project. As soon as you hear the word pet project, believe me, the level of emotion will double, and that can be within yourself as well as other people. Now, the next major risk that can occur when you become too emotional with a J-curve is it can turn into what we call a ski slope. Ski slopes are J-curves that don't turn. They just continue to suck more and more and more resource out of your business. And you keep telling yourself that it'll be okay sooner rather than later, so you keep throwing good money after bad. Now, if you have a J-curve in your business, you need to have the leadership presence to define at least 2 points of time on the ski slope. The first point, which is the higher of those two X's, is where you stop investing additional money into this project. You may well say, I will leave the existing capital where it is to see if it can dig itself out the hole, but I am not putting any more money into this particular project. I've had enough. Now, the second cross further down the ski slope is even more painful. That's when you say, do you know what? I've had a gutful of this project. I am actually going to take out whatever I can take out now, because if I don't take it out now, I will lose the lot. Now, that is an extremely difficult decision to make. In fact, both of those decisions are extremely difficult to make, particularly if you are emotionally connected to this project and you just personally don't want to see it fail. Now, a couple of examples of emotional argument. The first example is one that I think everybody on today's webinar will have heard before, and that is the concept of sunk costs. I am sure you've all sat around a table and somebody with a bit of strategic vision, it may well have been yourself, has said, I have a concern about, about this project. I believe that we need to exit this project. Somebody else says, well, we can't exit this project. We've already got $100,000 invested in this. Don't you understand? If we walk away from this today, we're just going to burn that entire investment. We can't do that. Look, all I need is another $10,000 or $20,000 and everything will be fine. Now, I promise you, if you are on a ski slope, the only decision or discussion that you will be having some 2 months later is somebody telling you, we can't exit this, we've got $120,000 invested in this project. Believe me, once you've defined that something's a ski slope, there is no justification for putting good money after bad. And each and every one of you will be able to define, I suspect, if you've been in business long enough, will be able to define something that's turned into a ski slope. I hope it hasn't cost you too much money, but you'll be able to define that something that's become a ski slope, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the other key example of emotional involvement is, of course, people. And this is where so many of these concepts that we're sharing in this webinar series join up. So the information that Ken gave you on people management. People, in my experience, is one of the biggest J-curves that most businesses experience. And that they are, of course, also the most emotional resource in your business. In fact, they're the only emotional resource in your business. If any of you are out there arguing with your machines or your computers or anything like that, then you've got an issue I can't help with. The emotional involvement in your business will be people management. And I wonder whether many of you have had an experience that I myself have had many times in my business career, where you have recruited somebody that's resume looked absolutely spectacular. You'd heard great things about them in the marketplace. The interview was absolutely spectacular. In fact, you were convinced that this recruitment was going to be the most successful recruitment you'd ever done. And you recruited this person with incredible enthusiasm and confidence, only to find out at a later date that that person didn't work out. Now, Ken shared with you that some of the key reasons for that occurring is that cultural fit wasn't there, and that's extremely hard to check for initially, although there are some tricks that Ken shared with you to do that. But here's the reality. Having done this myself, and one of the businesses that I did a turnaround consulting assignment on was a recruitment consultant. There are 3 phases to any recruitment, and many of you will have gone through these phases. So allow me to name them for you. The 3 phases of recruitment are called faith, hope, and charity. I'll explain why I call them those. The faith stage starts on the date of the interview, where you are absolutely convinced that you're making the best decision of your life and you have complete faith that this is going to work out well. And that phase carries on for some time. In fact, right up to the date where they start working for you. And on that day, you're somewhat surprised that they don't appear to be quite as good as you remember from the interview. But you hope it's going to be okay. So you've now transitioned from faith to hope. You hope it's going to be okay. You make the decision that if you put a little bit more at the elbow management next to them or give them a bit more training, you hope it's going to be okay. And then the hope phase meanders on for a while. And then one day you wake up with this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. And you realize that no matter how much management you give them or how much training you give them, this person is not going to work out. Now, at that exact point of time, most executives fall into a major trap, and that trap is procrastination. They say something soft like, oh, give them another month, they'll turn the corner. I just haven't given them a chance to prove to me that they're going to make it. Maybe they're a bit slower than others. Let's give them another month, they'll turn the corner. You have just entered the charity zone. You know, every instinct in your body tells you that this person is not going to turn the corner, but you are extending this ski slope. And can I tell you that the cost of the charity phase is a lot more than that person's salary. The real cost of the charity phase is the negative impact it has across the rest of your business, both internal and external, as that person continues to struggle in their role. Guys, if you have a ski slope in your business, whether it be people or whether it be something else, you have to exit. And if you don't exit early enough, that ski slope can be very damaging or even fatal to your business. And I'll give you some examples of that a little bit later on. So do not become emotionally connected to the J-curve. It is, without a shadow of doubt, the hardest element of managing any business. Now, if that's the most challenging rule, the most important rule is rule number 3. Do not take on too many macro J-curves at once. I do not care how strategically brilliant your next strategic idea is. If it is the camel that breaks if it is the straw that breaks the camel's back, then your business will either suffer or fail. Seriously entrepreneurial people have to really control this instinct. They're forever coming up with great ideas that are going to make their business stronger. But if all they're ever doing is implementing good ideas and they're not putting enough focus into the actual implementation, if all they're ever doing is coming up with good innovation and they're not focusing on implementation, then they will weigh down their business to the point that it will eventually stall. I was running a workshop in Boston, Massachusetts, and this particular business was, the CEO of this business was a highly entrepreneurial individual, successful but very entrepreneurial, to the point where his staff were almost exhausted in terms of the ability to keep up with this guy's entrepreneurial flair. As part of the workshop, we went through a process of defining a J-curve register, or the J-curve register we'll talk about a little later on. All that does is to list the J-curves that are in the business, to give you an environment to track them on a frequent and regular basis. And very, very quickly, we came up with 4 massive J-curves, all sitting in phase 1, all sitting in the phase that were sucking resources out of the business, were costing the business cash flow. No sooner that we'd written down the 4th J-curve, up pipes the CEO again with, actually, Nick, we've got a 5th. Do you think we should do it? And I was astonished, actually, because this business had so much on its plate at the moment, and its cash flow was in a tight position. And all this guy was thinking about was the next exciting J-curve for him to go and play with. And I said to him, well, I think there are 2 questions that you've got to ask yourself as you assess this 5th major J-curve. The first question is, of course, is this going to be strategically beneficial to your business? And the answer is, by the sound of things, yes, it is. But the more important question is, have we got appropriate cash flow to do this now? And in this instance, the answer was a very resonant no. So the idea of identifying, prioritizing, and staggering your J-curves is critical to successful J-curve management. Now, that's a challenge in itself, because this landscape that we're on doesn't deliver us ideal opportunities in a beautifully ordered fashion. These things either come flooding in, or there can be some time between them. So your ability to pick the ones that are going to have the most impact on your business is absolutely critical. And some sort of a decision validation mechanism, such as should we, can we, that we dealt with earlier, is incredibly important to identify which of 2 or 3 really important initiatives that you could pursue will generate the most value for your business with the least risk. How many J-curves can businesses have? Well, that's absolutely determined by 2 things. How much resource in terms of cash has the business got, and how much resource in terms of executive headspace has the business got. It will differ for every business, and the scale of J-curves will differ for every business. If we were talking about Microsoft here, a J-curve may be $1 billion. If we're talking about another business, a J-curve might be $10,000 or $100,000. You will very quickly identify what the level of a significant J-curve is for you. But in my experience, trying to manage any more than 4 significant J-curves in phase 1 can be detrimental to your business unless you have extremely good procedures. Understanding the difference between aggressive and passive introduction. Aggressive is introducing them too quickly, passive is introducing them too slowly. Paradoxically, introducing J-curves too slowly into your business is almost as dangerous as too aggressive, because if you're not looking to make strategic investment in your business, you will not be preserving your competitive advantage on this rapidly changing landscape. The 2 questions for all new J-curves: is it going to benefit my business? Is now the right time? Challenge each of these ideas with those questions, including a number of others, which I'll give you shortly, and you will be better positioned to identify, prioritize, and stagger J-curves. Now, rule number 4 of J-curve management doesn't sound particularly complicated, but believe me, it's a lot harder than it looks. And that is, have and manage a plan that moves us quickly from phase 1 through to phase 3 as quickly as we can, so that we get rewarded for our innovative flair. And in defining that plan, you need to recognize the very different skill sets that sit either side of this investment. On the left-hand side, through phase 1, it's about innovation. It's about looking at the horizon and defining something that's going to make your business stronger in the future. On the right-hand side, it's all about implementation. Now, please do not think that one stops and one starts as this diagram depicts. I've simplified this diagram. In ideal situations, these two overlap, and the implementers are involved up front and the innovators are involved later on. But fundamentally, innovation occurs in implementation. And what this should bring into focus for you is the critical need for the innovator to have an effective handover process to the implementer. And that handover process needs to be communicated effectively, documented effectively, and proceduralized effectively. If that handover is not effective, I promise you one of two things. Either your J-curve valley is going to be deeper and wider than you initially hoped, or worse, it will turn into a ski slope. Now, here is an individual that's extremely dangerous to businesses, and that is the innovator that will not let go of their baby. So they have become extremely excited in a particular project. They've identified it, they've introduced it, they've partially implemented it, they've not documented it effectively, they've not communicated it, and they've certainly not handed it over for somebody to drive it up into phase 3. At exactly that time, a brand new J-curve starts flashing at them from the horizon. A nice shiny new toy flashes at them from the horizon, shouting, "Come and play with me, come and play with me, I'm new and exciting. That one that you've been working on for 9 months is getting a bit boring." So the innovator will quite often jump at the new shiny toy. But if they've not transitioned the older J-curve onto an implementer, then what's highly likely is that right in the middle of the risk zone, your J-curve will stall. So very, very dangerous to not have an effective transition strategy from the innovator to the implementer. Final rule of J-curve management is to maintain a J-curve register. Now, you can house this in whatever tool you want. I particularly like housing these in Excel so that you can change them easily on an ongoing basis. And Bob, one of the things that I'll do following this webinar is I will send you, along with a PDF of these notes that we're looking at today, I will send you a template for a J-curve register that you can distribute to your members that enables you to track J-curves. Easy to update being in Excel. Part of the culture of understanding this is to commit to updating it every 30 days with a question along the lines of what information's come to light in the last 30 days that changes our view of the future. Exactly the same question that you heard me ask in the real-time planning session. Very, very powerful question that enables you to manage your business on a changing landscape. What will happen when you set up your J-curve register is a number of things. Immediately, you'll identify how many J-curves are in the business at the moment. If you end up having dozens and dozens and dozens of these on your register, then it's quite possible that you should be taking your foot off the innovation pedal and putting it on the implementation pedal. The other thing that it's going to do is very quickly identify stalled J-curves. Now, J-curves can stall in phases 1, 2, or 3. Obviously, if they're stalled in 3, you've got some reward, probably not as much as you want, but the really dangerous stalls are in phases 1 and 2. You'll pick up the stalling because in the J-curve register, one of the columns is a date column that defines the next date of the next action. And that column will that date will consistently get missed because you're too busy. But in many respects, the most important thing that the J-curve register is picking up is highlighting ski slopes. You will see the amount of money sucking out of the business ever increase, and the phase column will never get out of phase 1. If you have ski slopes in your business, you have to act. Now, 2 ways that something can come off the J-curve register. The first and preferred way is that your J-curve has been successful. It's reached the blue sky, it's started to reward you. Now, some people choose to leave J-curves on the J-curve register when they've reached phase 3. Some people choose to move it to a different section of the J-curve register called phase 3 J-curves or completed. That's very much up to you. The other way that something can come off the J-curve register is that you've recognized that it's a ski slope and you've taken the painful decision to exit. If the J-curve doesn't come off the register and you've committed to looking at the register every 30 days as one of your management meeting agenda items, Every month, this thing is going to flash at you saying, hello, remember me? At some stage, you thought I was a good idea. You spent some money on me. Have you been rewarded yet? Now, establishing this J-curve register will not guarantee that you make perfect decisions. It will not guarantee you don't have stalls or ski slopes. But what it will do is give your instinct and intuition the very best opportunity to capture these things before they're too late. Too many businesses hold all of this detail and information in their head, and that creates a lot of stress and pressure on the executives. Now, given the project management nature of so many of the members of CSIA, let me just make a comment about the difference between this and a project management system. Many of you would be thinking, oh, does this guy understand that so much of our business is project management when we're really good at this? Yes, I do, because I've worked with so many members of the CSIA organization. But there is a distinct difference from a detailed, engineered project management system and a J-curve register. A J-curve register is much higher, it's much broader, it's a management tool to help capture when things are going wrong. A project management system typically is more detailed and more granular and sits underneath. The two work very well together, and if you've already got a project management system that's highly detailed, then adding a J-curve register to the front of it can make it even more powerful. Other considerations with regard to J-curves. Questioning a J-curve today does not necessarily mean you're questioning the original decision. There's very little to be gained other than the benefit of experience by using today's information to try and identify an idiot yesterday. Quite frankly, it might have been the right decision to enter the J-curve yesterday. It might be the right decision to exit the J-curve today. You're on a changing landscape. Things change rapidly. You have to be flexible enough, and the entire thrust of this entire webinar series is you being flexible enough to create maximum value on a changing landscape. So if the circumstances around you have changed, then the applicability of this J-curve may also have changed, and challenging yourself to ask that question as frequently as possible is important. Here's another one. Can J-curves slip backwards? If you've got these things through phase 1 up into phase 2, can they slip backwards? Well, of course they can. We actually refer to those as W curves, or sometimes double dip J-curves, where you may well have started to get out of phase 1 into the catch-up phase, and then the landscape's changed and you've slipped backwards again. Can J-curves be macro and micro? Well, yes, they can, and that's because we encourage businesses to look at J-curves on different levels throughout the business. In some businesses, a single J-curve register is sufficient, but as the business gets bigger and has divisional involvement, then it's quite possible that you will set up divisional or micro registers, and things that might be important to the division might not hit the company-wide register, but you still want the division looking and tracking at those J-curves. Now, costs associated with J-curves. There are two fundamentally important costs. The first is really obvious. If you get J-curves wrong or manage them poorly, it will kill cash flow, it will kill return, and it'll kill profit. Nothing particularly important there, unless, of course, you want your business to survive. So those three numerical things will all hurt. But do not ignore the second cost associated with J-curves. Incredibly difficult and sometimes hidden. We call it executive headspace. Executive headspace. If you ask your executives to juggle too many J-curves at once, some or all of them are going to hit the floor. Now, let's have a look at the broader impact of J-curve management, because it's not all bad news. If you manage J-curves well, there's significant upside. And the significant upside of good J-curve management is that you will build cash reserves. And that will then provide you with the choices and opportunities to do everything that you can do with build stronger cash reserves. Maybe it's invest in other J-curves. Maybe it's acquire competitors. Maybe it's provide more cash distributions to the owners of the business. Whatever it happens to be, all of those are positives for business. If you manage J-curves poorly, The problem is that you'll waste money. Things will drop through the cracks. You'll be sitting around a table and somebody will say, hey, whatever happened to that thing we talked about 3 months ago? It seemed like a really good idea 3 months ago. We threw a bit of money at it. Did we ever get any reward for it? And everyone will just look around the table shaking their head because it fell through the cracks. But without a doubt, the most serious ramification of J-curve or poor J-curve management is potential bankruptcy. And do not think that I'm joking. There are countless examples of businesses, successful businesses going broke because of poor J-curve management. One of the more interesting case studies, if you're interested, is to go and have a look at the case study of a company whose name is synonymous with perfection in engineering. So it's in fact entered the vernacular of the English vocabulary. I am, of course, referring to Rolls-Royce, the English company Rolls-Royce. Now, in the late 60s, Rolls-Royce brought to market the most successful product the aviation industry has ever seen. I am, of course, referring to the jet engine, code name RB211 jet engine. So successful that it's still being sold today. For those of you who've flown on one of the double-decker jumbos, the A380s, the engines on the double-decker jumbos are modified RB211s. They're called Trent engines. They're modified RB211s. This company has sold millions of these across a span of almost 50 years. Quite an incredible achievement. Rolls-Royce brought the RB211 to market in 1968. In 1972, they went bankrupt. How is that possible? How can you be the person who brings the most successful product of all time to the market and then 4 years later go bankrupt? Well, you research the RB211 story and you'll find out a couple of things. The first is that the original budget for the RB211 was £70 million. That was a lot of money in 1968, £70 million. Actual spend, and I love this because it supports something I was talking about earlier, actual spend exactly double, £140 million. But that wasn't the J-curve that sank them. What sank Rolls-Royce was at the time that they were researching the RB211, they were also working on 35 other engines. In the 2 years leading up to their demise, a massive 40% of their expenditure resource was directed at projects that never launched. Too many J-curves, good night, nurse. If it can happen to Rolls-Royce, it can happen to any business. So please be aware of that. Now, when we get to the conference in San Diego in April, there will be a session on J-curves, and we'll pick up on some of the concepts that we have talked about today. But more importantly, what I want in that session in San Diego is to have a practical breakout session where people have the opportunity to discuss J-curves that are within their own business. And by doing that, I'm going to be asking people to break into pairs, and I'm going to be asking them to role play with one of them being the business owner and one of them being the executive that comes to the table with an idea. And I'm going to ask them to present the J-curve following these 8 bullet points. And I'm going to ask them to be quite specific in sticking to these bullet points. What you will find if you participate in that exercise is, first of all, while this looks simple, it's a lot harder to do than it looks. Some people will be very, very good at describing things like the blue sky. Innovators love talking about the blue sky. They'll find it significantly harder to talk about variables that could result in a ski slope or likely depth and breadth of the valley. But what you'll learn if you come to this session in the conference is that this particular set of 8 questions can be the foundation of great business cases, not just for J-curves, but for all expenditure in your business. And by playing through this role as both the CEO having to listen to this presentation and the manager having to give this presentation, you will learn very quickly that it's harder than it looks, but is incredibly valuable. So I don't intend to go through that today because that's one of the things I'd like to do in a much more practical sense at the conference in San Diego in April. So, in conclusion with regard to J-curves, the reality about J-curves and so many other decisions that you make in your business is having a good strategy at the beginning is all very well, but if it's not well executed, it will fail. Time and time again, when we look at reasons why there's been business failure, it's rarely that the idea was not a good idea. It's almost inevitably execution was not strong. I've often made the comment that a weak strategy well executed will inevitably outperform a strong strategy poorly executed. This framework that I've shared with you today and some of the other concepts that we talked about earlier in the webinar series, such as 3W accountability, they are tools to help you execute better. You've probably got a whole suite of great ideas. If you're entrepreneurial, you'll have more good ideas than you need. How you convert those good ideas into good execution and then genuine value is absolutely critical. So those are the key elements that I wanted to touch on today with regard to J-curve management. At the conference, as I mentioned, we're going to open up some of those concepts in a more practical breakout manner, and I hope you come and join that session and you enjoy it. I'm more than happy, Bob and Monica, to take specific questions now. We've left a little bit of time at the end of our hour for questions. I will also, Bob, be sending you a PDF of the slides, and I'll be sending you a template of the J-curve register for you to distribute. So I'll hand it back to you now, Bob, in terms of whether you have any questions that you would like to ask.
Thank you, Nick. I thought of a question. Maybe this is better answered at the conference, and I don't know that there is a very black and white answer, but is there a ratio or a percentage of, if you were to compare how much money a company should pull from savings or borrow to, let's say, open a branch office or hire a block of people because you want to enter a new vertical industry that you want to serve? A ratio of how much money do you invest for that innovation phase, that phase one, compared to what? Would you compare it to annual profits, revenue, so as to not get yourself in trouble with too much, with going too overboard with investment? Is there a practical limit that you could take and compare it to something like revenue? I don't know if I'm asking this clearly or not, but I hope you get my point.
You are. Look, it's a very good question, and it comes up a lot. The sad and simple answer is there's no easy calculation that you can say take your revenue and divide by 4 or anything like that. Because, in fact, the number of J-curves that you can harness at any point in time is not driven by revenue or profit. It's driven by access to capital and access to executive headspace. So depending on how much spare executive headspace you've got, you may well be able to do more J-curves, but also you'll need not just executive headspace, you'll need funding, which means either reserves in your own business, which has nothing to do with revenue or profit, but more to do with how you've managed your cash flow in the past and will in the future, but also access to capital markets such as banks and funding resources. If you had limitless access to funding and limitless executive headspace, you could in fact run as many J-curves as you wanted. And as long as a certain percentage of them hit gold, your business would benefit. So it's in fact the access to funding and executive headspace that's going to determine it. Now, while there is not a nice, neat, clean formula, what I can tell you is that as businesses get into this process, they very quickly find the level that suits them. It'll be driven by their entrepreneurial desire. It'll also be driven by their debt to equity risk profile. If some businesses out there just simply hate having debt, and that's fine, if that's their profile, so be it. Others are quite happy to use the bank's money rather than theirs to run their business. So depending on your profile to risk in terms of debt to equity, and depending on your entrepreneurial profile, you will either have more or less J-curve activity, but it's not formula driven, it's personality driven.
Okay, that makes sense. Very good. I don't see any other questions that came in, so I'm going to start closing things here. However, if in the next moment or two someone has a question, feel free to enter it. I want to thank everyone for attending today and for your participation. My hope that you've had several takeaways and that you're thinking about this investment, this innovation, and then the payback, and that you'll come to the conference perhaps with examples, with questions, and come to Nick's session. Nick, thank you very much for contributing your time and expertise both for today and also for helping me to develop this webinar series. It's greatly appreciated.
And Bob, can I just expand on that? If you're going to be coming to the session, and I hope you do, just go back to the list on page 16 and think a little bit about that beforehand. I mean, you can wing it when you get to the session, and a lot of people do, believe me, that's fine. But if you've given it a little bit of thought, if you thought about those eight questions before you come to the session, you're going to get more out of it. So I would very much encourage you to give that a little bit of thought before you come to San Diego.
Very good point. That's their homework. Okay, wonderful. Well, Nick, thanks for staying up so late at night in your home country of Australia. Your presentation was really insightful, and we're looking forward to your 2 presentations at the conference. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. Another item is be sure to complete the survey that's going to show up in your inbox very soon. It's our feedback to know how well we're doing. There are 5 quick bullet lists I'm going to share with you. First of all, register for the April 9th webinar on integrated business systems. Number 2, have the primary contact at your company complete the just released JP Morgan CSIA industry survey. Number 3 is have your sales and management team participate in the CSIA Sandler Sales Solution training program that we've instituted. Number 4 is come to the conference, April 23rd to the 26th in San Diego. And lastly, watch for news flashes on the soon-to-be-released CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange website. It is absolutely awesome. So before I say goodbye, see if there are any questions here.
We did have one question coming in, Bob. The question is, can we obtain a spreadsheet for the managing G-curve?
Yes.
Is that what that template is, Nick?
Yes, it is.
The J-curve register? Okay.
Yeah.
Just a different name. Wonderful. Okay. Well, there are no other questions, so with that, I'm going to say goodbye. And again, this is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director, and thanks again for everyone for attending, and thanks, Monica and Nick. Bye now.
My pleasure. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to stop the recording.